Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service. It is Monday, February 13th, 2023. And a quick reminder, those of you who call the Weather Service forecast line, that number changed over a year ago, but our offices still get an occasional call. People not realizing that number now is 855-937-4977. So please make note of that. You can always go back rewatch this broadcast if you missed that number. But also, if you want additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence, and it'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska, Hawaii to the lower left. You point anywhere, click on that map anywhere, and it'll bring up a forecast with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories for anywhere in the country. On the weather map this Monday afternoon, we have a couple of winter systems moving out of the western portion of the continental U.S. that'll be crossing out into the plains and Mississippi Valley, bringing a variety of winter weather, windy conditions. We have a number of winter storm watches as well as winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories, especially centered there through the southern Rockies down toward the Four Corners area and back up toward Montana and Wyoming. But here in Alaska, we're getting a pretty strong low pressure system impacting the Pribilof Islands with blizzard conditions, and then the western Aleutians with some very strong winds, maybe even some brief blizzard conditions, but more a period of heavy wet snow changing over to rain, so very sloppy there with the wind. Wind chill advisories along areas of the Arctic coast tonight into the day on Tuesday, and then the potential for some blizzard conditions settling into the eastern Arctic coast later Tuesday night and Wednesday. And an advisory for snow, a winter weather advisory for snow for tomorrow, Tuesday evening into Wednesday morning for the northern central parts of the Panhandle. And overall, we're going to see near to below normal temperatures continue through the end of the month, with potential for above normal precipitation across at least the interior as we go through the latter half now of February. Quick check of some FAA webcams. I like this image out of Coldfoot there, the south side of the Brooks Range, showing that sliver of clearing to the north. Temperature 15 below at Coldfoot this afternoon. Sleet Mute has clear skies, 0 the current temperature in early afternoon, but was down to 35 below 0 this morning. We had as cold as 42 below there up along the north slope way up at New Exit. But as far as St. Paul, St. George getting pounded with blizzard conditions, winds gusting 60 miles an hour with snow and blowing snow. Blizzard conditions will continue there tonight and at least into the morning there on Tuesday. Further to the east, Wrangell, just some scattered lighter rain showers, 36 degrees, and it's looking like during the daytime Tuesday will be the driest period for the Panhandle. There could actually be some patchy fog develop tonight in areas of the Panhandle due to some clearing, and at least it's going to be brief because the next front will be coming in Tuesday night and Wednesday. So here are the wind chill advisories, winter weather advisories still for some blowing snow along the northwest Arctic coast, Wainwright down through Point Lay and Cape Lisburne. Wind chill advisories along this area of the eastern Arctic coast. Wind chills could be as cold as 65 below, and then later Tuesday, especially Tuesday night into Wednesday, there could be some blizzard conditions developing as the winds strengthen there along the eastern Arctic coast. Further south and west, St. Paul has the blizzard warning in effect at least through mid-morning on Tuesday, and then behind me we have the winter storm warning for a combination of high winds. Winds could gust as high as 80 miles an hour west of Adak through Shemya, with the potential for some heavy snow transitioning to rain. So it's going to be a sloppy, very windy system on the backside of a strong low passing south of the Aleutian chain. And then finally, here is the area that will be under the winter weather advisory for accumulating snows for Tuesday evening through Wednesday morning. morning, with the heaviest snows falling in through the icy strait corridor, including places like Pelican, Hoona, on through Elfin Cove and Juneau, where as much as 4 to 8 inches of snow could fall in that time frame. Another quick thing, well, aurora viewing, if you have clear skies, we're at last quarter moon today, and there's a potential for a couple of disturbances to trigger a minor geomagnetic storm, if not later this Tuesday night, sometime Valentine's Day into the next evening. So some active aurora will be possible along the Arctic Circle here as we go over the next, say, 24 to 48 hours. Across the satellite here, showing this frontal system pushing up in through the Alaska Peninsula. Here's the wrapped up low that's just south of the central Aleutians, Adak, and that area. And then on the back side of it, very windy conditions. As I mentioned, the winds could be gusting as high as 80, 85 miles an hour in the western Aleutians later tonight and tomorrow morning. And then the snows, blowing snow from the strong winds there up to St. Paul and St. George. And then we have a scattering of some snow and rain showers here, especially off the coast there of the Panhandle, and cold air just sitting up there along the north slope. As far as the fronts and low pressure systems, we have a weak low up in the lower Chukchi Sea, weak high pressure along the Alcan border there just east of the Yukon Flats. A couple of lows up in the northwest Canada, back in through the northwestern Gulf, but here's the main low south of the central Aleutians. This frontal boundary is going to work its way eastward as the low passes just south of the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. Late tonight, early on Tuesday morning, that's where the low will be, just south of the eastern Aleutians, and then this triple point will develop another low during Tuesday afternoon that will be the next system that lifts northeastward toward the Panhandle, so that as that frontal system pushes on up into Wednesday, the main period of accumulating snow in the northern and central Panhandle will come Tuesday night through Wednesday morning. Lows will generally be below freezing in the Panhandle tonight. Back out toward chilly readings, single digits and even below zero, much colder west side of the Alaska Range. And then temperatures tomorrow could still make mid-30s outer Gulf Coast there for the Panhandle. Still on the chilly side here, western Kenai on up toward Anchorage Bowl, low 20s at best. Temperatures steady, slowly rising Tuesday night into Wednesday morning there in the outer and southern part of the Panhandle. And then temperatures should get back up around 40 as a little warmer air pushes in with that front. Meanwhile, temperatures will be slow to moderate across south central interior. Coldest air has been up along the north slope Arctic coast. It was 42 below at New Exit this morning. Isolated readings 35 to 40 below, not out of the question. Temperatures have generally been just above zero from Fairbanks, say McGrath south and eastward, and then Wednesday again lows in the far north 20s and 30s below, and those wind chills could be quite bitter cold up there, as cold as 65 below, and then daytime temperatures back up near zero along and south of the Yukon River especially. Low temperatures Tuesday morning, interior upper Kuskokwim Basin could have readings again down around 30 below. It was 35 below at Sleetsmere this morning. And then out back toward the west, temperatures with the frontal system could be 35 to 40 here up through the Alaska Peninsula Tuesday afternoon, but still sub-zero west of the Alaska Range through the southwest interior. And then temperatures Wednesday afternoon do recover back up into the lower 40s across the central and eastern Aleutians, and maybe not quite as cold in the central interior, but still chilly. Temperatures averaging below normal for this time of year across areas west of the Alaska Range. Quick check of the temperature outlook for February 19th through the 23rd. Overall temperatures are expected to average below normal across the state, maybe a bit near normal here in the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, but potentially more so in the southeast part and northern Panhandle. And then precipitation could average above normal here, extending along the southwest coast as some systems come in off the Bering Sea, and then that moisture will spread inland up along the Yukon River north of the Alaska Range, so that could enhance the potential for above normal precipitation across the central interior through the end of the month. Maybe a little drier than normal along areas of Cook Inlet and Gulf Coast back into portions of the Panhandle.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
It's It's now time to check your aviation weather, and if you have a flight planned Tuesday or on Wednesday. Tuesday morning and afternoon, we're going to have an area of low pressure passing south of the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula with a occluded front arcing to the north and east of it, cutting across Kodiak Island into the lower Gulf, North Pacific, where a triple point will spin up a secondary low on Wednesday and pull that up toward the northern northeastern Gulf. Otherwise, IFR conditions, intercoastal mountains, far northern panhandle, Chilkoot White passes, also extending across the southwest Gulf, Kodiak Island back in through Bristol Bay, out toward St. Paul, and in through parts of the eastern Aleutians. We'll see IFR conditions. IFR conditions associated with that frontal system as it pushes further out through the Gulf and up into areas of the Gulf Coast and the up along, especially along on the south side of the Alaska Range, trailing back down along, especially the north side of the Alaska Peninsula into the central Bering, and then in the far west, that's the influence of yet a strong storm force low that'll pull another frontal system through the central and eastern Aleutians as we go through Wednesday. So IFR conditions will be widespread Wednesday morning across the Panhandle, eastern Gulf, northern Gulf Coast on up into the south east interior, including the Wrangell-St. Elias Mountains, south of the Alaska Range, west arm of the Alaska Range, and then back out through areas of the central Bering, including St. Paul, and especially there in through pushing into the central Aleutians. As that frontal system works its way further east Wednesday afternoon, we expect a broad band of IFR conditions through the central Bering down into the central eastern Aleutians on up into the western portion of the Alaska Peninsula, and then a continuation of some IFR conditions along the intercoastal mountains in the far northern panhandle on up toward Yakutat and parts of the St. Elias Wrangell Mountains there in the southeast interior. Otherwise, relatively quieter conditions anticipated across much of the interior. And at Tuvik Pass, we'll generally see MVFR conditions become VFR. Same thing, brief period of maybe MVFR early, giving way to VFR conditions there along the eastern Brooks Range. Further south and west, though, IFR conditions will be pulling into Lake Clark and Merrill in response to that frontal system, and moisture and some precipitation working its way northeastward. Rainy Pass, VFR early Tuesday, IFR though, and Windy Pass, we'll see VFR conditions become IFR from the south entrance southward, and MVFR north of the north entrance. Same thing, Isabel Pass, MVFR becoming IFR as that moisture spreads further north and east. And then Mentasta Pass should be able to hold on to VFR conditions during the day Tuesday, though the south entrance areas south of there will be MVFR. Tanita Pass also getting some moisture pushing up from the south and west, VFR becoming IFR, and then Portage Pass, MVFR early on Tuesday becoming IFR there, especially by afternoon and for evening. And Chilkoot and White should generally hold in IFR conditions throughout Tuesday. Freezing levels at the surface run from way out toward the western Aleutians and then ride across the tip there of the Alaska Peninsula along the east side of Kodiak Island up into the northeastern Gulf near Yakutat, and then across the inner channels of the Panhandle. There is a little bump upwards of freezing levels of loft 2 and 4,000 feet in the North Pacific, well south of the Alaska Peninsula, and Kodiak Island as a result of a general trough of low pressure over the southwest with a frontal system lifting out of the North Pacific up into the Gulf. Now, the greatest threat of icing will be along that frontal system, generally above 3,000 or 4,000 feet in the thicker cloud cover that's producing some precipitation, and another area near a center of low pressure, the one that's passing south of the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula there in the North Pacific. When we look at the upper level jet stream winds, they are strongest out over areas of the Gulf, over 100 knots, but behind me there's a jet max coming across the eastern Aleutians as high as 150 knots, kind of a trough ridge pattern. So we have the troughiness, and at 700 millibars, 9,000 feet, we see a couple of weaker low circulations, and at 3,000 feet, still low pressure circulation generally over the southwest, and then the frontal band with those stronger winds coming in across areas of the Gulf, pushing toward the Panhandle, and a strong band of winds out there with that storm force low out in through the western Aleutians. A quick check, widespread considerable moderate turbulence, could even be pockets of isolated severe turbulence from the Aleutian chain, Alaska Peninsula up along the Gulf Coast.
Hello again, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. And joining us again, talking about the augmented reality sandbox, is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. And he's actually talking about a project from AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. A lot of acronyms, but some really fun stuff today, right, Eric?
You bet. We've got a learning tool that is a tool that's fun to use, and it really has a relevance to actually daily lives of anyone who goes outside and sees lumpy topography in Alaska. We've got a lot of mountains and such. You know, when I was younger and go on your first hike in the hills, say, you're given, maybe you're in the Boy Scouts or you get at the kiosk at the trailhead, a topographic map, a flat piece of paper with all these lines on it, bullseyes, long lines that curve back on themselves, say, perhaps things that look like this, a quadrangle or a topographic map. We've got here just to illustrate a couple of examples near Denali. Alaska has so much topography, so many mountains. And what are all these lines that we see? It can be tough to know what this means the first time you look at it. What we've got, all these lines represent lines of where the elevation of the topography goes through a certain level above sea level. Say that this line represents where the mountains have gone from below 1,000 feet, mean sea level, up through 1,000 feet and above. That's your 1,000-foot contour. And when the mountain keeps going up, you're up to 1,200 feet, 1,400 feet, and so on. And that's how you get this little bullseye around the peak of a mountain.
Kind of makes layered slices, right?
Kind of like layered slices. Nice way to look at that. And when you see the lines are closer together, you're going up more steeply. If the mountain rises more slowly, it takes you longer in horizontal space to go through those different vertical increments.
That is really hard to visualize.
Right. Imagine you're looking at a 2D piece of paper, two-dimensional piece of paper, but you're trying to understand what the three-dimensional world looks like. Well, enter the augmented reality sandbox. Yes, what is that? It is right here. We have the sandbox with us today, Sandbox 2.0, portable version. Sweet. Built up at University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we've got a couple of folks helping out today.
Let's see, Alana Valaji, and she's a mechanical engineering student from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. If you want to give us a thumbs up there, Alana, thanks for helping us out today. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator from AKwx, also helping us out today. Thanks, Courtney.
And this tool here has a Microsoft Connect to sense the level of sand in this sandbox. And then the Connect feeds its information into a computer that then sends a signal to a projector to draw the appropriate topographic lines on this topography. The fun thing about this, as we can see here, is that the sandbox and its Connect and its projector, they all work as a team. So here we've got a mountain in the middle of the sandbox. What if we took down the mountain to some degree? Watch as the software responds and redraws the topography.
Kind of a caldera forming there.
There you go, And what's fun about the sandbox, too, is it knows that gravity flows downhill, and we've got some water that's actually down in the lowest elevations. And what's happening now is we're making it rain a little bit. We'll fill up rain into that elevated lake bed, that caldera, as you said. And so now water is pooled up there. And what if you gouged out an outlet channel?
Glacial dam release.
There you go. The water flows out. What we're seeing here is a tool that allows people to touch and connect Microsoft Connect, RRR, to connect two-dimensional topographic maps like what we have here, these flat things on a piece of paper, to the real three-dimensional world. I think this Sandbox's real particular application as a learning tool to young people is, what does a two-dimensional map mean when it's trying to represent the three-dimensional world? This sandbox is kind of both at once. It's actually three-dimensional, lumpy topography there, the sand, but it's got these lines drawn on the three-dimensional sand that would be on a two-dimensional piece of paper.
Wow, that is a huge leap from the learning that we experienced when we were younger to how children and even adults are visualizing in these new forms of technology. It allows that to kind of reshape their thinking and visualize this in a very useful and absolutely hands-on way. It's amazing.
It's a hands-on tool, and
it's hard for me to sit here and not go play with that.
Well, that's what happened at GINA up at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks when the first model was was being made, the prototype with plywood and such, we had professional adult professor types had heard about this, and they came by because they wanted to see how it worked.
Okay.
And everyone becomes that idealistic, wonder-filled youngster.
Sure.
And you just can't help but play with that, and to see how it reacts in time, and
right.
It's a dynamic learning tool, and it responds.
That's exactly the word. Yeah.
And you wonder what applicabilities beyond a teaching tool for topography can it have. You can see how in Alaska we have inundation mapping is an issue. If you had water slosh inland, say in a coastal flooding event on the western coast of Alaska or the Arctic coast, you could see this. The concept is illustrated here as an introductory learning method. I think this is a potentially good outreach tool for all of us in Alaska.
Okay, so not only just a topographical sense, a mapping sense, maybe something that leads into understanding of how geographic information systems work with GIS, but also geology, if we wanted to get into kind of the formations and the bigger land masses and the representation of the 2D map. We could go into hydrology, which is very important in Alaska, of course, and even just understanding weather sense. Mounding up a big pile of sand could be that Arctic high-pressure system sitting on top of Fairbanks, and the voids would be low-pressure systems. This can go a lot of different directions.
Yes, exactly. Wow. It's not just landforms, but pressure has contours of high pressure and low pressure. And I wish I had this kind of a learning tool when I was taking Meteorology 101 back 25 years ago.
Wow.
Would have been helpful, I think.
Probably would have gotten a better grade, yeah. Okay, thank you so much for coming by, Eric, and Alana and Courtney, thank you so much for your help there in the sandbox. We are going to play in the sandbox a little bit more coming up tomorrow on our next edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We hope you join us for that. In the meantime, make sure you go to alaska.edu/EPSCOR. That's alaska.edu EPSCOR to learn more information about what we're doing with this augmented reality sandbox around Alaska. We'll see you next time on Alaska Weather Facts.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the final segment of our show, the marine weather. But first, we'll look at the sea ice edge, and the ice is extensive throughout the north at the Chukchi Sea down through the Bering Strait. We're going to see winds picking up along the Arctic coast here, especially by the time we get into Wednesday. They'll pick up out of the east 30 to even 35 knots. That could result in some shifting of ice and certainly blowing snow that could even potentially become blizzard, or at least approach blizzard conditions there around Kaktovik. But otherwise, areas of the Bering Sea, the ice is going to continue to press southward. We'll have a northerly component to the wind, especially on Tuesday, and we've had a couple of stronger lows pass through the Aleutian chain, so that's helping, at least on the backside of these systems, to try to pull that ice a little further south. For the southeast panhandle, on Tuesday, winds will be southeasterly, inner channels 15 to 20 knots, waves 3 feet, Lynn Canal, but as high as 7 feet, Dixon Entrance. The outer Gulf Coast, look for 30-knot southerly winds, waves generally running 12 to 13 feet. A frontal system will produce accumulating snow, especially central northern panhandle Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. And as that front tries to push upward into at least the outer panhandle, we'll see winds ahead of it, southeast as high as 35 knots down here at Dixon Entrance with 11-foot waves. Gust as high as 40 knots along Lynn Canal, waves 5 feet. And then winds for the outer coast, southwest 25 to 30 knots, especially south of Gustavus, with waves around 14 feet. For the western, northwestern Gulf, including Cook Inlet, strongest winds will be the lower portion of Cook Inlet, northeast 40 knots, waves running 10 to 11 feet. Winds off the Kenai east 30 knots, as well as in through Prince William Sound, where waves there will be about 6 feet. And on Wednesday, winds will come down across the northwestern Gulf. North winds 15 knots, Prince William Sound, 3-foot waves. Variable winds through Turnagain Arm, northern portion of the Cook Inlet, but still look for west to northwest winds out of Cook Inlet at 30 knots with waves 8 to 10 feet. On Tuesday, winds will be generally out of the east-northeast, Shelikof Strait, Bristol Bay, 25 to 30 knots, waves 5 to 6 feet. But on the other side of a trough, winds will be southerly to 35 knots south of Sand Point. Waves could be over 20 feet there, and then northeast winds to 30 knots with 11-foot waves north of Cold Bay. And for Wednesday, winds across much of the region in the northern part of the Panhandle and Kodiak Island will shift to the west-northwest, 25 to 30 knots, but then try to turn back around toward the east there north of Cold Bay with 6-foot waves, and still southwesterly 30 knots there south of False Pass. But areas across the Aleutians will generally be out of the north-northwest on Tuesday, the central eastern Aleutians, with winds of 35 to as high as 45 knots south of Nikolsky. Waves will be 18 to 26 feet in the North Pacific. North of that through the lower Bering, waves of 18 to 22 feet. But once you get west of Adak, winds pick back up from the northeast to east from 45 to 60 knots with 25-foot waves way in the west. And for Wednesday, we'll continue to see some rather strong winds, especially across the western Aleutians, but generally winds going back from southeast to south, 35 to 40 knots, waves 13 to 20 feet on the North Pacific side, 9 to 13 feet on the Bering side. But once you get west of Adak, winds pick up from the south, 35 to 45 knot gales, and waves, especially west of Kiska, could be in excess of 30 feet. Along the ice through the central eastern Bering, winds will be out of the north, 15 to 20 knots, Norton Sound, south of St. Lawrence Island. But on the edge of the ice, 25 to 30 knot winds will help to pull that ice a little further south. By Wednesday, winds shift to the east, 40 knot gales, St. Matthew down through St. Paul, St. George, waves running 10, 11 feet there, and still a component with a north to northeast wind coming in off the ice, so the ice still could shift a little further south. And then across the far north, 25 knot east-northeast winds along the Arctic coast, 15 to 20 knots down through the lower Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait. But Wednesday, pressure gradient's going to increase along the Arctic coast as the Arctic high to the north tends to just be slightly stronger, and we expect winds to pick up out of the east, 30 to 35 knots, the potential for some blowing snow, bitter cold wind chills as cold as 65 below, and even potential for some blizzard or near blizzard conditions toward Kaktovik. Otherwise, 15 knot winds coming down through the lower Chukchi Sea.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.